Okay, so I'm going to start off with chapter 1, and this session will be known as chapter 1, part A. I'm going to look at the first 9 verses in Ruth chapter 1, and I'm just going to read verse by verse and then give an explanation on how it applies to us. So Ruth chapter 1, as I said, it's in the Old Testament, started off with, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. So we're talking about the land of Israel. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So remember in this verse, they talk about the tribe of Judah. So the city of Bethlehem is located in Judah. And as we go through this chapter, you will realize that this is important. Ruth ended up being an ancestor of Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judah. And in modern day times, we have a lot of immigration. I am an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Jamaica. And so immigration is not new. It has been going on for a long time. Remember when Jesus was born, to escape infanticide, the angel told his parents, Joseph and Mary, to move to Egypt in order to escape Herod's plan to kill the infant Jesus. So immigration has been going on for many years. So here is this gentleman. He's an Israelite. He is married. He has 2 sons. And there is a famine in Israel. At this time, Israel was ruled by judges. So remember that after the Israelites left Egypt, after being there for 430 years as slaves, they ended up in the promised land, Canaan. And after the death of Joshua, to Moses, then Joshua, and then you have a series of leaders, and these leaders were known as judges. And as you move through the Bible, you will see after a while the Israelites, in order to be like their neighbors, demanded that they no longer wanted to be ruled by judges, but they wanted to be ruled by a king. So in this time, Israel was still being ruled by judges. And so in verse 2, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. So, and remember that Moab are descendants of Lot. So when God told Abraham, who is the father of Israel, remember Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had twins named Jacob and Esau. God changed Jacob's name to Israel. Israel had 12 sons, and those became the tribes of Israel. So when Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, which is his native land, and started going to somewhere where he didn't know where he was going based on his obedience to God, he took with him his nephew, who was an orphan, named Lot. And Lot eventually had children with his own daughters, and one of them was called Moab. So the people of Moab are descendants of Lot. And they became enemies of Israel. So Israel had a famine, and Elimelech took his family to escape famine. Just like now, most people who immigrate for economic reasons, some for political reasons, but the vast majority of people who leave their native land to live somewhere else does it because of economy, financial reasons. So in the 3rd verse, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. So remember, Elimelech was married to Naomi. He had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They are now living in Moab because there's a famine in Israel. But Elimelech died, and it left Naomi and his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Back in those days, remember that women didn't earn. So the man was the wage earner in the family. So when a woman becomes a widow, that's a big deal. The woman becomes a widow, that's a big deal. So while they're living in Moab, Mahlon and Chilion are now adults, and so they got married. So the fourth verse, so they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. So this is what we're going to be discussing for the next few weeks, is Ruth. And they lived in Moab for about 10 years. And, sometimes we find ourselves in certain situations where we have to make a move. And, when things aren't going the way we don't want them to go, we shouldn't just sit still. Life goes on. And so, we need to move with the times. And so here they are away from their homeland of Israel. They are now living in a foreign land, Moab. But life goes on. These children, Mahlon and Chilion, are now young men. And so they marry the woman in Moab. So Ruth and Orpah are Moabites. And Mahlon and Chilion died also. So Elimelech, the father, died. Mahlon and Chilion grew up, got married, lived in Moab for 10 years, and then they also died. And so now we have three widows: Naomi, who is the mother of Mahlon and Chilion, and Orpah and Ruth, who are the wives of Mahlon and Chilion. And like I said earlier, in those days, widows tend to be poor because they couldn't earn. In those days, women depended on their husbands for their finances and their wealth. So now we're at verse 6. She, meaning Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. And so, while Israel was being ruled by judges, they will have good judges and not so good judges. So, for a while, when a certain judge was ruling, they would be obedient to God. They would do what God said. They would obey the commandments. Remember, he said, do not serve any other gods except me. And the problem with the Israelites, when they entered the promised land, they did not get rid of the other inhabitants. Remember when the Israelites moved from Egypt to the promised land, there were already people living in the promised land, and their job was to get rid of those people. But they got tired of fighting, and they decided they're going to coexist with these inhabitants that were already in the promised land. The problem was these inhabitants did not serve the true and living God. And as the Israelites lived, among them, they began serving the false gods of the original inhabitants of the promised land. And, so they were disobeying God's commandments. And so whenever we disobey, then we allow the enemy to gain access to us, because that edge that God has placed around us isn't there any longer. When we step out of the will of God, we have stepped out of that edge of protection that God has ordained for us. And so there were times when things were difficult for the Israelites when they were outside of the will of God. Then they would cry to God, they would pray, they would cry to God, God being a forgiving God, not being like us who tend to hold grudges. Him being a forgiving God would forgive them, and, things would turn around for them. So for a while there was this famine in the land. People were immigrating to other countries, including Elimelech, Naomi, Mahlon, and Chilion. That family moved to Moab. Now they are in Moab. The men have died, leaving 3 widows. And now, even though in those days they didn't have cell phones and telephones and pagers, she still was able to hear that, things were doing better in her homeland of Israel. Now the famine was gone. And so she decided that I'm by myself. My sons, my husband are dead. So I'm going to move back home. And so now she's telling her daughters-in-law that she's going to return back to her homeland of Israel. And, as we talk about women know thy worth, I have to mention the relationships of in-laws. We know traditionally we hear that, mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law don't get along. But, when we marry into family, you're not just marrying one person. You're marrying the peers of that person, the siblings of that person, the grandparents of that person. And so it's for us to, and I'm not married, but for those who are, seek to have a good relationship with your in-laws. I mean, I have brothers and sisters who are married. And so, even though I'm not married, I have to, ensure that I have a good relationship with my brother's wife and with my sister's husband. And so Naomi had a good relationship with her daughters-in-law. And that's something that we should strive in. And, when you find that there are good relationships between in-laws, then the children in that family have multiple eyes on them, watching out for them, caring for them. And so there isn't any problem of parents visiting the maternal grandparents or the paternal grandparents. It's important that children in the family, have good relationships with their maternal and paternal relatives. And that's where the in-law relationship comes in. And so, Naomi said, I'm going to go back to my country because I hear that the famine has ended. And so now we're at the 7th verse. So, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. So remember that Elimelech and Naomi came from Bethlehem of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So here Naomi is ready to return back to her homeland of Israel. Her daughters-in-law both are from the country of Moab, but they loved and respected their mother-in-law so much. They clearly had an excellent relationship with their mother-in-law that they wanted to immigrate with her to Israel. Even though Naomi, was an old woman. And in those days, when, a couple gets married, if the husband dies and he has a younger sibling, I remember in those days that the younger sibling did not get married before the older sibling. So the older sibling had to get married first before the younger sibling get married. Fortunately for my sister, that's not true. I'm the oldest girl in my family. But in modern time, that's not true anymore. But in those days, the older sibling has to be married before the younger sibling could get married. And traditionally, if that older son dies, his widow then becomes the wife of his younger brother. And then children that they have are the children of the deceased older brother. And so here Naomi was an older woman. She has lost her entire family. The only family now that she has are her 2 daughters-in-law. And she is telling them, you don't need to come with me to Israel. You don't need to leave your relatives. Remember, they are from Moab. They're not Israelites. You don't need to leave your relatives to come to move to Israel with me. Please go back to be with your parents. And in the 9th verse, it said, the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And we're going to stop here at the 9th verse for our first session. So for session A. So, here, several things we need to realize. None of us, or most of us, do not like change. As humans, we tend to be habitual. We drive the same direction between work and school, between work and home, between school and home. We don't like change. And so when we get into a comfortable zone and life happens, because that's what it is, life happens. And sometimes when life happens, we have to learn how to shift. All right? And so we know that there was a famine in Israel. And as an immigrant, I will tell you, it's a big deal leaving everybody, everyone, everything, everywhere that you know, and travel over water and over land to move somewhere else and pretty much start over. And the older you are when you immigrate, the more difficult it is to assimilate, especially if there is a language barrier. If where you're moving from and where you're moving to speak different languages, that's also an added challenge, an added stress. And every country has its own culture, and so you have to learn that. But when things happen, we can't just sit down, curl up in a ball and cry. And, it's okay to cry. But at some point, you have to stop crying and do something. Sometimes people find themselves in relationships that have gone sour. And some women, the husband pack up and said, I want a divorce, I'm leaving. I said, oh my God, I didn't see this coming. And, most of us is because we don't see it coming because we have our heads buried in the sand, or we are in denial. Your husband work ends at 4:30. If he's coming home at 10 p.m. every night, ask questions. Where have you been for the last 5 hours? Some people are afraid to ask because they don't want to know the answer. So he packs up, he leaves, and you can't just sit there and cry, especially if you have minor children that is depending on you. So, if you don't have your own career, then you have some people, once they get married, they have never worked. You have to shift. You have to make a change, So either go out and find a job if you have a skill. You may have to go take some courses, some short courses, a CNA course, maybe 3 to 6 months, a home health aid course, maybe 3 to 6 months, maybe a paralegal, something that, it's not going to take an extended period of time. So at least you can start earning money to pay your bills and to raise your children. And if that means, if your husband seems to forget that he has a family to feed, because out of sight, out of mind, then you may have to go to court and have the court enforce child support. But, there are some, when life happens, difficult decisions have to be made. And like in this case, Elimelech took his family and said, if we stay here, we're going to starve. So we're going to have to go move somewhere else where they have food. And so, that's what he did. And even after they did that, life still happens because Elimelech died, leaving his wife a widow. His sons grew up, they get married, and then they die, leaving their wives widows. And sometimes some of us are in situations where as we end one crisis and we start to breathe, here comes another crisis. One thing we know that, with life has seasons. Just like naturally in nature, you have, spring, and after spring, it's going to come summer. After summer, it's going to come fall or autumn, and then winter. And some years, the winter seems to go on for longer than you would like. It goes on into spring. And there are some times when the winter is shorter than other years. And there are times when during the summer, you might have only one category 4 hurricane. And then there are some summers when you may have 3 category 5 hurricane. And so we just have to understand, just like in nature, in life, if you're having a good season now, you know that eventually something's going to happen that's going to make you uncomfortable. But it's not for us to sit here and worry about what's coming. We need to live in the now, all right? That's one. But we also need to prepare for what's coming. You know, my mother always say, we should store up our prayers. Sometimes when you are going through a hardship, you are so stressed out, you are so distracted, you don't even have the desire to pray. And so when, you're in the summer season of your life, that's the time to be praying and storing up some prayer. Sometimes when life happens, you get sick, you're in pain. Sometimes all you can say is just Jesus. You can't even breathe a prayer. All you can just call his name. That's it. And so when things are doing good, when things are going well, that's the time to really spend time in prayer, spend time in fasting, and reading the word. Because there's time when for whatever reason you can't read the Bible, and what you have read is what going to come back to your remembrance. That's what the Holy Spirit will bring back to your remembrance. And when you read certain things, at the time you read them, and they may not seem applicable to you, but if you keep on living, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where the God will just bring back that word, to you. And so it's important that in the summer season of life, when things are going well, the children are behaving themselves, your husband is doing what he's supposed to do, you're able to pay the bills on time, you're able to put away something in the bank for a rainy day, the car is running like it's supposed to, you're not changing tires, you need to replace your tires more frequently because they are running down more frequently. Things like that. You don't have to be paying out money for doctor bills because nobody's getting sick. Everybody's staying well. That's the time to store up. Put away some. Don't just because there's extra. You should feel the need that you have to spend it. Learn to put away stuff. Put away some money, not because there's a little extra you should always, have to spend. Try to avoid going into the stores. Just kind of make a promise, make a list. This is all I'm going to buy. And that's what I tell myself, because sometimes I go in there and I see something on sale, and I feel like because the normal price is $20, now it's $8.99, I should get it. Learn to discipline yourself to buy, what's on, your list. So Elimelech, took a shift. He moved from Israel to Moab. He died. His sons, because life goes on, gets married to these women who are not Israelites, but they are in Moab, so they married Moabite women. And these young women got along with Naomi, and that speaks volumes about Naomi. That her both daughter-in-laws, loved her, and loved her enough that when she says, I'm going back to my homeland, they were willing to leave their family and leave their homeland to move with her. And, I heard someone say, in order for you to have a friend, you yourself have to be a friend. And sometimes we are busy pointing fingers at others. And if we just gonna sit back and examine ourselves and see our role in the situation, we'll realize that we aren't doing what we are supposed to either. And it is important that we do self-assessment. I don't know the reference right now, but there's a scripture verse that said that I examine myself daily because I don't want to preach others into heaven and then me myself go to hell. And so it's important that we do a self-assessment. We don't wait on others to tell us, how we are doing. And that's with our spiritual life, that's with our family life, that's with our professional lives. If someone does, at work, I think all of us at work at some point get evaluations. Your evaluation, if it's accurate, shouldn't come as a surprise to you. You should know, have an inkling, how you are doing. And, we need to, whether before you get into a relationship, before you get signed on the dotted line with a contract, you need to know what the expectations are for that position, what the expectations are with this person. You shouldn't be married 5 years and one person saying, I want a child. Other person said, no, I don't want to have any children. Before you all said, I do, you should have known whether that person is interested in having a family, yes or no. Whether if you realize that, like I said, life happens, after you get married, you might realize that there is a fertility problem with fertility. This should be had. If it turns out that we're not able to have our own children, are you open to adoption? And I think that's a lot of time that's the problems with relationships. Yes, things change. We are humans. We should always be evolving. But the essence of us shouldn't be that drastic a change. People get sick. Some loved ones die. Things happen and people mature and they might look at life differently. And I know I can tell a point of change in my life was when my mom passed away suddenly. And, I went from a very passive, whatever, just give it to me, I'll take it, to no, I'm not going to take anything from anybody. I'm not going to take it. Life is too short. I'm not going to lie down, let someone walk over me. I'm not going to let someone use my back as a ladder to get to the top. I'm just not going to do it. That's my change. And I can tell you precisely when that happened. And so there are times when certain things in our lives happen where we kind of did almost like a 90-degree or 180-degree turn. But also we have to learn to be flexible. But communication is key. And so here, Newman made it clear to her daughter-in-law that you shouldn't feel compelled to leave everyone and everything that you know to move to a strange land, because Israel would be strange to both Ruth and Orpah, who were from Moab and were not Israelites or Jews. Hopefully you learned something today. The key today is, learn to shift. We have to be flexible. And, when we shift, remember that life goes on. We can't just be stagnant. When Israel was taken into captivity, and the Lord said, you're going to be there for at least 70 years. So plant your gardens and eat those things that you plant. Build houses to live in. And when your children grow up, let them get married. And that was God's warning to them that you're going to be in this strange life, going to be in Babylon for a while. So go ahead and keep living. And so if you're in a situation where your relationship of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years have come to an end, keep living. Your children, for the last 18 years, you were a homemaker, taking care of laundry and lunches and taking children to soccer games and track and field and dance and recitals and all that stuff. And now the children have grown up and gotten married themselves and have moved out of the house, and you're at the emptiness stage. It's not the time to get depressed. Look around and see how else can I contribute. Maybe you can help at the children's church at church. Maybe you can call a young mother at your church and offer to babysit their child for an evening to give them a break. There are so many things that we can do instead of just kind of curling up and singing, woe is me. So, when things happen, learn to shift and don't stay stagnant. Learn to be flexible. Remember that as women, we have purpose. Whether you are, 12, 13, whether you are 21, whether you are 35, whether you are 50, whether you are 70 or 90, regardless of where you are in life, you still have value, you still have purpose, and you still have something to offer. I remember during the last few years of my father's life, he was a pastor. He couldn't go out and visit people and witness to people like he used to do or preach at revivals. And so he would witness to the nursing staff, to the dietitian who comes to the room, to the housekeeper who wipes the floor. Anybody who enters his room, he, would witness to them because his tongue still worked and he could still talk. And so, he could still share the love of Jesus with someone, even though he couldn't go out and evangelize as he used to do before he developed a severe heart failure. Learn to bless others. When Naomi advised her daughters-in-law to return back to their family, she blessed them. Learn to pray for others. I don't care what we are going through. We should learn to pray for others. And when you pray for others, you cannot take your eyes off your own problems and sometimes that's what we are so focused on our problems that we're not allowing God to work it out. Learn, even when you are going through, learn to pray for others. When you pray for your children, learn to pray for other people's children. So, we should practice blessing others. Practice blessing others. You must be surprised how much you yourself be blessed. Thank you for joining Queen Esther for the first session of Woman Know Thy Worth. I will be back with chapter 1, part B, where we're going to discuss, from verse 10. I think we're going to keep on talking a little bit on the verses 1 through 9. But when you have time, as you drive down the highway, go on YouTube and listen to Ruth chapter 1 as we continue with the book of Ruth on Woman Know Thy Worth. And we will see how this young woman, Ruth, who was a Moabite, eventually become an ancestor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Have a great evening. God bless you.